And again, today, so thrilled, Julia Patrick, the American Nonprofit Academy. She's the CEO and the Grand Poobah. And then myself, Jarrett Ransom, your nonprofit nerd. But most importantly, so excited to have this conversation with Dr. Rebecca Corbin. She is with the National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship. And wow, this is going to be a robust conversation. Julie and I are probably going to be quite quiet during the show because Dr. Corbin has so much information to share with us.
Awesome. So thank you, Jarrett, for getting us going. And welcome, Dr. Corbin. So this is one of the things that we're really interested in and why we wanted to have you on the Corona Chronicles is the concept of design thinking as an approach to coming up with new methodologies and strategies. And nonprofits have been faced like never before. And so we thought having you come and share this basic structure and approach, we're not going to be able to get through so much, but definitely if we could kind of have you give us the cursory approach. So what is design thinking in the overall?
Okay, great. And thank you both for inviting me on. I love the spirit of this show, and I have spent the last couple decades of my life working in various nonprofits, eventually finding my home in higher education and association management. So I love this space, and I personally have fallen in love with design thinking over the last 4 or 5 years. I've learned about it. It's actually been around for quite a while. You know, most people that write about it sort of credit Plattner and Kelly back in 2004 for coming up with the initial sort of thought processes around design thinking. So my personal journey is I learned about design thinking, believe it or not, closer to the last economic downturn, which was 2008, 2009. I attended a conference, I believe at Montclair University in Northern New Jersey, and they had these design experts that were talking about how do you design functional space and how do you make changes with sort of limitations. And I found it to be fascinating. And, you know, I went on with my career and my life, and we all sort of recovered the last time around. And then back in 2015, I found myself as a new CEO of NACCE. Prior to that, I was a vice president at a community college in New Jersey, and I found myself in a very different role. I had always had a fundraising responsibility, but I didn't realize joining NACCE sort of the opportunity and the challenge that I would be faced with. So that's when I really reached back to design thinking as a way, as a nonprofit leader myself, trying to reimagine what this organization could be and how might we serve our customers. So to tell you a little bit about design thinking, and for those who are tuning in, I would encourage you to Google design thinking, and you'll find all kinds of different approaches. Generally, what will pop up first is the Stanford Design School process that many people think about with design thinking. But, you know, there are other versions of it as well. We work closely with Intuit, which many of you may know from QuickBooks and Mint and some of their suite of products, and they take design thinking in a little bit of a different way. So I'm going to just describe briefly the process, and then would love to hear some questions from you. And I would love to give you some examples of how we've used it at NACCE and how I've seen leaders of both colleges and nonprofits use it effectively around the country. So the abridged version of the Stanford Design School is really that design thinking begins with empathy. So in an age of social distancing, I saw one time that people say, since I can't give you a hug or hold your hand, maybe I'll put the hand over my heart. And to me, that is a beautiful metaphor for what empathy is like. And I think as we go through our lives, and particularly with all of us being under incredible amounts of stress, you know, revenue-wise, how are we going to take care of the people that we serve? It's always good to begin at that place. And so if we're looking at really solving a problem, so we're all faced with maybe a laundry list of problems, both big and small, the best way to begin is really from a point of empathy to think, well, how is your customer or your recipient or your employee or your board member feeling about this? And I can tell you, I have a wonderful board of trustees that I work with, and sometimes before I get on a call with them, if it's an issue that I'm not sure exactly how to approach, I try to think about what are they feeling right now? Are they under a lot of stress? So that's sort of the first part of design thinking, is really getting in touch with your own emotions. The Stanford Design School model, the second is really to define what the issue is, because, some people shop around for a solution. Oh, I have this great idea for a business I want to start. Well, how do you even know anybody would be interested in a business like that? So, the defining process is really important. And how we run workshops a lot around the country is we'll bring groups of people together. We get them to connect with each other on a human level, not, Julia, you're a CEO and you're a leader, Jared, as well. But like, who are we as human beings? We're, daughters and mothers and, the church members, maybe, other ways that we define ourselves. And then what we want to do with design thinking is to ideate. So generally when we run design thinking sessions, we might divide a group of 20 into 4 groups. And if we're trying to solve a problem, like for example, a nonprofit problem might be that you can't hold in-person events anymore. That would be the way of us defining what our problem is, because if I know that 50% of my revenue comes from events, that's a really big problem. So the third step of design thinking is really the ideation phase. And some of the rules of the game, which make it really fun to ideate, is you can't talk about how practical the solution is, because what that does is it kills creativity. So it might seem pie in the sky, but if we've all connected it as human beings, then my role as the CEO isn't any more important than the student that's sitting at the table, or maybe somebody who doesn't have a job, or somebody who is from another country and maybe doesn't even speak English. So what we're thinking about is just radical collaboration. And it's not just brainstorming, because we can't get into the practical aspects of how do we operationalize it. We're just thinking about what could be. And generally, when we run these workshops, we'll let people ideate, depending on how much time we have, for 10 to 15 minutes. Often we'll use lots of Post-it notes. So people reflect. Okay, here's our problem. We can't hold in-person events. So everybody think individually, what might we do instead? And that's kind of the language of design thinking, is how might we? So we're not limiting ourselves, because to be honest, sky's the limit. Look at all that's been created in the months since we've been locked down. Who knew that we would be this creative? So then when we move through the third stage of ideation, we go on to what we call prototyping. And this is a fun stage as well. And when we run these workshops, what we tend to do to, again, ignite creativity is to have people come up with a visual representation of this. And the best example that I can share with you on prototyping is a workshop that I had the privilege of participating with 2 of my good friends and colleagues at Hillsborough Community College that have created this magnificent place called the In-Lab, where they bring together cross-disciplinary people to solve things. So we were at a VentureWell conference together. We were doing a session on this exact topic. And so we challenged the group to come up with something to solve food scarcity. So we empathize, what does it feel like to be hungry? What is the problem of food scarcity? And then how might we ideate on solutions? So we challenged the group, the 3 of us. We said, you can use anything in the room that's not bolted down, but you have to show what is your solution to the problem? How are you going to test this and prototype this? So one of the groups came up with the idea of taking a Dunkin' Donuts coffee box, which they converted into this sort of makeshift RV, and they used lids on coffee cups to symbolize the wheels, and then they opened it up and they said, food scarcity is all over our community, and our community, they don't have money for gas, they can't do different things. So what they were doing is showing us in a visual way how they might create something that doesn't exist yet. And then with this prototyping, they had to start to think about, well, where are they going to get the RV? How are they going to retrofit it? How are they going to get the food? Who is going to do this? And so that takes you through the prototyping. And then the testing phase is really going out into the market and testing your idea. So that example of the food truck, what they would do in that situation is maybe they borrow someone's van, or maybe they rent some kind of a vehicle, get some grocery stores to donate some food, and then drive it around the neighborhood and see would people come out and what kind of food would be appropriate. So just a little example, but what I would love for everybody who is tuning in is to think about, don't get stuck in this is an overwhelming problem, or you're so surrounded with problems you don't even know what to do first, because I know myself, the things that I worry about the most are my employees cared for? Does my board feel that I'm providing enough information? Do our members feel value from us? And if I just live in that place, it's anxiety provoking, it's scary. But if I start to sort of organize what are the main problems that I'm tackling and pull people into my world that can follow a process like this, we can do a lot together. So that's kind of a long explanation, but I wanted to give you a flavor of just an example of how design thinking can really light up your world.
So let me ask you this, because I'm really interested, Dr. Corbin, when we're looking at boards and leadership or teams, and we can all agree that we're in a time of phenomenal change and duress for many reasons. Is this now the time to engage in that, or are people so seized up that they can't navigate this and they want more just like, give me the answers, tell me what to do? Do you know what I'm saying? Like in a time of largesse, like let's just say 6 months ago, our nation's economy and society was at a completely different place. How would design thinking come about with a board versus this Saturday?
Right. That's an excellent question. I think to answer the first part of it, I think now is the perfect time to engage in this kind of thinking and process. Now we have to do it differently. The world that I live in, we are thinking about higher education and the delivery and really difficult equity issues. Those who have been left out before, even more left out. So, how I would engage, and I did this actually with my board. We weren't sure that enough of our presidents would be able to pull away in the early days to have a board meeting. So we decided we were going to just do a board meetup. And surprisingly, everybody but one board member was able to make that session. So we used a platform, much of what you're using now, the Zoom platform. There's free versions of it. So if I were a nonprofit that was small and I didn't have the cash to do it, I would probably get the free version and start to think about, if I wanted to engage more, how to do that. Now, to use technology like that effectively, there's a bit of a learning curve and we're all learning it together, but it's fairly, easy and intuitive to start to use. Some of it is bringing your board along. A year ago, I had thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have our board meetings via Zoom? And I didn't get an overwhelming response to that. But what I'm seeing now during COVID-19, people love the opportunity to connect with one another. And just that one example of this board meetup, it was really funny because sometimes board meetings, people get really buttoned up and it's, you want everything to flow just nicely. But what was interesting is you saw people in their home environment. So it actually drove home the empathy point, because you could see some people were struggling to try to make their space look a little bit more professional. Every once in a while you see a cat jump on a desk or something, but all of those things I think contributed to people feeling like if we stay connected as humans, if we can start to define what our problems are, if we put our heads together, I think we can solve them. Another thing on technology that I think that you can do is there are functions on Zoom where you can actually have little breakout sessions. So VentureWell in my world was one of the first major conferences out of the gate that went virtually. And I thought they did a beautiful job. Was it perfect? Absolutely. They had little glitches here and there, but it was very well organized. And I think people are very forgiving, especially because we're not in a space that any of us have ever been before. So I would encourage people, and I do this in my writing and my work, I try to do it in my own life, is, try to risk a little bit. Step outside of your comfort zone. What is the worst thing that could happen? The technology wouldn't work, and we've all been there. I had a presentation one time I was giving in front of a couple hundred people, and this beautiful documentary video that we had spent all this time putting together, the sound didn't work. So what do? You snap into action. And I said, well, I'll just sort of narrate this. And somebody came up to me afterwards and they said, oh, that was such a clever way to do that. Little did they know it was because the sound didn't work. Or, we reschedule. So I think the time to act is now. Are you going to get everybody on board? Absolutely not. There are people that are scared to death that aren't at the place that maybe many of the people that have tuned into this call are. But if you are that person, if you are the leader, or if you can be the first or second follower, and you can model this and start to come up with solutions, what does that do? It empowers you because you don't feel helpless. Even if what you try doesn't work, that's part of the entrepreneurial process. Have you learned something? Will you try something differently? And so using design thinking, I think in a personal sense is helpful because you can use the Post-it notes and you kind of go through the process. But I believe that there are ways, and I've seen it work technology-wise to do it. We're experimenting with our organization for our fall conference, in the event that maybe we only have, instead of 500 people, we have 50 people together. How might we engage our members? And we've come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Like, we could send everyone that registered this like box of really fun things, like Post-it notes, but little surprises and things like that, so that if I'm here in my office, home office, where I've been for the last 9 weeks, I can take the wall behind me and I can participate in a way utilizing what's in front of me and through this process. I think the beauty of design thinking, I think other techniques that we use, is they're very practical, they're very inexpensive, but they're very empowering, because what you're doing is you're trusting the wisdom of your group. And if I could just throw in there one other concept that I think is important for design thinking, is not to get people that all think and look the same. We at my organization have a very strong equity, inclusion, and diversity agenda. Now, that being said, we're mostly women that work at my organization, but we are fortunate to have some diversity, and we have hired a man who does just fabulous work on the equity end. But what we don't want to do is have, like, the three of us might be very similar in our worldview and background. Like, what we need in our group is we need somebody who looks different than us. We need a man, we need a student, maybe we need an older person, maybe we need someone with a disability. We need to mix things up. In our language, we call that the crazy quilt, because we make the best decisions when we're not just reinforcing norms, because the three of us all have a communication, marketing, fundraising background. That's not helping us solve a problem. We're just reinforcing our own worldviews. One other quick example, if you don't mind, on the design thinking end, where I think it's worked really well, right before the shutdown on travel due to the COVID-19 situation, a colleague of mine, Tim Putnam, who's an active NACCE member at one of the colleges, and I traveled out to New Mexico. We worked with an historically Black college and university out there to support a high school student who came up with the idea that he wanted to really plan this conference on economic development, which sounds crazy, to be honest with you. I was like, we were so busy, but we wanted to support this young man and see his dream come true. So it was a lot of back and forth, and we got there, and so we went through sort of this similar training of design thinking and what might that be. But you had economic developers, you had deans, you had other people in the room, and while Tim and I did some of the facilitation, you had this young man who's not even old enough to rent a car, because he hasn't even graduated from high school yet, who had this concept. So we sort of bootstrapped this conference, and what we came out with was a lot of ideas that we're writing about now in our journal, and things about how can we support the agency of high school students and people that you traditionally, because they're not the experts. So out of town, I asked this young man by the name of Aristotle, I said, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to college? And he said, well, I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And I was able to get into Stanford. So I thought, how funny, we're using some of this design thing, and this young man who's doing all these wonderful things that wants to help others is going to do this. So all of that is to say that design thinking does not have to be for people in higher education. I've seen it work with middle school children. It works equally well with chancellors and presidents. You have to mix it up a little bit, but I think it's trusting the experience, and it is adhering to the steps. I'll also say that For those on the call that want to learn more about how you can use it in a corporate sense on your customers or your members, is really look at Intuit's Design for Delight model, because that really gets into the heart of how do we serve our customers. And that should be what we all do, whether we are, running a food pantry or, a school or whatever our job is.
Right. So go ahead, Jared. I'm going to put up this screen. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Acknowledge what you said, Dr. Corbin, about, to be a risk taker. And I always say that in the nonprofit sector, I don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of nonprofit executives, leaders, board members willing to take risks as readily available as the for-profit sector. And I always say, and if you've seen some of these shows before, I pride myself in being an innovative disruptor for that fact, is to really, let's ideate, let's come up with some ideas. And, and I always like to ask my clients, what would you like to do without saying that's not possible? And I wrote down a lot of notes, copious note taking was going on. The radical collaboration, right? So you said, we cannot talk about in the ideate stage, which is number 3, you cannot talk about how practical the solution is. And I just love that, and it really is in the nonprofit sector. I would love to encourage even more leaders to take that step and to be risk takers. And to Julia's question when she asked, is now the time to do it? I think now more than ever, we have the silver lining and this opportunity to really ideate. And if you didn't think that that's what you were doing, if you didn't think that you were design thinking, guess what? You were. So I do have a question, because I've done some design thinking kind of organically. My question to you, Dr. Corbin, is design thinking always linear? Or do you go back to maybe, I'm looking at my notes, do you go back, like, let's say you're in prototype stage, which is number 4, do you then go back to empathy up to 1, or do you stay in this linear model?
Yeah, what you're going to do is you're going to have learnings from the prototype, right? So some people think about it in terms of, if you think of a business model, like either that example of that RV to serve food, you might go out there and it doesn't work. So what if you invested in risk? So then you might go back and start, did you define the problem well? Or, maybe you got to come up with another idea. And we've been working with another thought leader on really the generation of ideas. And I think what you'll see is the first idea sometimes is like not the best idea. That, you should generate lots and lots of ideas and then decide what you want to prototype. The other thing we're thinking about is Intuit's Design for Delight sort of methodology is that it starts with that deep customer empathy. And you're going to go, from thinking broadly to more narrowly, and then you're going to experiment. So, the true entrepreneur, like if you can think about it, like the pharmaceutical industry, how many failures do they have to have success? It's hundreds of thousands, like things are just not going to work well. If you can change your mindset in terms of not trying to avoid failure, but just like lean into it, because what are you going to learn from that? Jared, I think it goes to your point about taking risks. And I will full disclosure tell you, I am not the kind of person who likes to fail publicly. I have developed a thicker skin over the years, but it is something I think those of us who are in nonprofit, I care deeply about other people. And sometimes things go awry and they don't work out. And I think we need to really own that and see that as part of the process. I can also tell you, the more that you do that and go back and iterate, the better you'll become at it. NACCE's experience, which I shared with you a little bit initially when I took over as the CEO, our budget was probably about $1 million or so. And I found out soon into my appointment that the majority of our operational funding was going away. So I became so entrepreneurial that year. You can't, I was taking risks like, how are we going to develop new products? I knew from our membership base, because our membership is very affordable, even if I raised membership dues 50%, it doesn't even come close to solving the gap. So it was that process of almost like a design thinking of how could we provide value to members, but unrestricted revenue back to the college. And when I think back on those days, as I would go to bed at night and I knew exactly what the payroll was that I had to meet that month, and I didn't want to run into the negative. So what it caused me to do is that prototyping and experimentation, but to really lean into that discomfort. And I'll tell you, this year alone, our budget is close to $8 million, but we've diversified a lot of our revenue streams. We've got new partners. We've become very good at grant money. Now, not everything has worked perfectly, and it takes courage to own the things that, you know, sometimes like I thought were just a great idea and it just didn't work out that well. And I think that that's fine. I try to set that culture with my staff. Like, you want people taking initiative, but you also have to follow some type of protocol and rules, or, you know, things can go awry. But yeah, I think because there are so many different models, Jared, I would encourage people to explore them. And, you know, even if you want to do a little test, like with your family and friends, I know people are doing all kinds of fun things like virtual coffee meetups and happy hours, different things, depending on what people like to do. But you can really, you know, have some fun with it and start to take ownership so that we don't feel like victims in this situation. I mean, I understand what that feels like to open up the financials and be scared to death that you're in the negative. But what I've also learned about finance, which is what I've spent a lot of time in, is sort of off the topic of design thinking. But I think all of us as nonprofit leaders really need to lean into understanding a balance sheet, understanding cash flow, understanding that you can use design thinking to test out new products and services. But, you know, fiercely stick to your mission, but not be so afraid of that feedback. Now, when I open up the financials, I mean, we did such a good job saving money, and then all of a sudden the stock market crashed and we're not doing events. And, you know, you just have to take a deep breath and kind of own it. But I know for me personally, and for my staff and many of the people in my world that I care very much about, what we are trying to do at this time is position ourselves for when things open back up, because they will open back up, but it's going to be very different. I heard this watching the news, 42% of the jobs that are lost may not come back. That's very, very sobering. So
it's amazing. And, you know, it's hard to believe, Dr. Corbin, but we are out of time. You've given us so much to think about. And as Jared has said throughout our 8 weeks together, this is the time for bold thinking. This is the time to look at new things. We are delighted that you have joined us, Dr. Corbin. I'm going to throw up your information on the screen. And oh my gosh, we've had so many questions that we couldn't get to. So Kelsey, Sandra, MJ, Lauren, we're going to try and get some of these questions answered for you offline. Here's Dr. Corbin's information and the information about NACCE. Check out their website. They have an amazing amount of information that I think can help any nonprofit, large or small, because we have such a wide variety of size nonprofits here with us. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, Jarrett Ransom. This is probably the episode where you heard the least from us.
Yeah. Which is good. So thank you, Dr.
Which is good. Hey, tomorrow we have Pam Gaber on with us. She's going to talk about her organization, fascinating woman who deals with children and animals. Very, very interesting. And so this has been the Corona Chronicles. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us. Dr. Corbin, I suspect we'll have you back on. And I'm going to sign off as I do every day. Stay well so you can do well. Thanks so much, everybody.